The first time Officer Mark Hensley made me kneel in the rain, I thought my life was over. The second time I saw him, I was standing on the steps of City Hall, and he was the one who couldn't meet my eyes. It's strange how the world spins, not always fair, not always just, but sometimes it turns slow enough for you to see the full circle. The night it happened still haunts me in fragments. The metallic taste of fear in my mouth. The cold of the wet pavement pressing against my knees. The roar of a police cruiser's engine idling, headlights glaring into my face like an interrogation lamp from some old war movie. I had just gotten off work at the community center, the kind of job people call noble, until they have to live on the paycheck. My hands still smelled faintly of disinfectant from wiping down tables. The rain was steady, not the romantic kind, but the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you feel like the city itself is trying to wash you away. I didn't see him at first. Officer Hensley. He was leaning against his cruiser like he owned the whole block, twirling his baton slowly between thick fingers. I'd heard of him, everyone in our part of town had. Stories traveled fast when a man in uniform treated his badge like a hunting license. "Evening," he called out, though his voice wasn't the kind you answered with a smile. I nodded, kept walking. "Hold up." 2 words, and my legs froze before my mind could argue. He closed the distance in 4 slow steps, boots splashing in shallow puddles. The stench of stale coffee and cheap aftershave hit me before his shadow did. "What's in the bag?" he asked, pointing to my backpack. I told him leftover food from the center, meant for the kids tomorrow. He smirked. "You people always have an excuse." I knew what you people meant. He didn't have to spell it out. He made me put the bag on the ground. Unzip it. One by one, he pulled out Tupperware containers, opening each one, sniffing like I'd hidden dynamite in the mac and cheese. The crowd gathered quick. It always does when someone in blue decides to make a scene. "You think you're better than me, boy?" That word "boy" burned hotter than the shame crawling under my skin. Then came the order. "Kneel." It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about the bag. It was about making sure everyone saw exactly where he thought I belonged. So I knelt. In the rain. In front of the bodega where I bought milk for my mom. In front of the neighbors who'd taught me to ride a bike. The rain made everything blurry, except for the sound of his laugh. That night, I went home and didn't sleep. Not because of fear, I'd lived with that my whole life, but because something in me had shifted. He wanted me small, invisible. Instead, I started planning. It took years. Years of working 2 jobs, of volunteering at every city meeting, of standing behind podiums in echoing gymnasiums when nobody thought my words mattered. I shook hands, I listened, I learned. I built something stronger than anger. I built a voice people wanted to follow. And then, last month, I won the election. Mayor of the same city where he'd once made me kneel. Which is why today, as I stepped out of City Hall in a crisp suit, I saw him standing at the edge of the crowd. No uniform now, just a man in a worn jacket, watching like he wasn't sure if he should stay or leave. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see that I remembered. I wanted him to know the city did, too. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted him to kneel. He didn't kneel, of course. Men like him don't bow unless something's broken inside them. And I wasn't here to break him. At least, not the way he had tried to break me. But he didn't leave either. He stood there, hands buried deep in his pockets, his jaw tightening every time the crowd cheered. I gave my speech the usual Victory Day blend of hope, unity, and all the polite phrases that make journalists nod and scribble. But beneath every word was a pulse of memory, a silent drumbeat of "I'm still here. I outlasted you." Afterward, I was shaking hands on the steps when I saw him again, hovering near the last row of people. My security detail didn't notice him to them. He was just another face. But I knew that weathered skin, those small, calculating eyes. I excused myself from a handshake and walked toward him. "You came," I said. My voice didn't crack, but the air between us felt thin. He grunted. I wanted to see if it was real. "It is." I let the words sit there. Not a boast. Not an invitation. Just the truth. "You talk real nice up there," he said, jerking his chin toward the podium. "But talk's cheap. And cruelty's expensive," I shot back. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his expression, not guilt, not remorse. Just recognition. He knew exactly what I meant. The weeks after the inauguration were a storm. Cameras followed me everywhere. Every public move was dissected, praised, criticized. But none of it felt heavier than the letter I found on my desk one Thursday morning. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper folded twice. You don't know the half of what he's done. No signature, no explanation. My first instinct was to ignore it. My campaign had drawn its fair share of anonymous tips, most of them nothing but gossip. But something about this note lingered. The ink was smudged, like the person who wrote it had sweaty hands. The letters leaned forward, urgent. I decided to ask around quietly. That's when I learned about Tyrone Jacobs. Tyrone had been 16 when Officer Hensley arrested him for loitering. 2 years later, he was still fighting to get the charges dropped. No drugs, no weapon, just a kid waiting for his cousin outside a store. And Tyrone wasn't the only one, there was a whole list. Cases that never made the news because they were buried under procedural discretion. I spent nights combing through old files, reading the same patterns over and over. Young, black, in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Officer Hensley at the center. The more I read, the more I understood why he'd shown up that day at City Hall. He wasn't curious about my victory. He was measuring the damage. One evening, I was alone in my office, city lights spilling across the carpet, when my phone buzzed. An unlisted number. I almost didn't answer. Mayor Carter, the voice rasped. It took me a second to place it. Hensley, we need to talk, he said. About what? About how you think you know me. You don't. I could have hung up. I could have told him to speak to my lawyer, my staff, anyone but me. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I agreed to meet public place, middle of the day. We chose a diner near the highway. He was already there when I arrived, hunched over a chipped mug of coffee. No badge, no weapon that I could see, but the same coiled energy, like a snake warming in the sun. You've been digging, he said without preamble. Is that a problem? He smirked. Not for me. For you. I leaned back. You think you can scare me? I think you don't understand the game you just walked into, he said. I was following orders. Whose? He didn't answer. Just slid a napkin across the table. On it was a single name, someone high up in the city council. Someone who'd publicly supported my campaign. I stared at the napkin. You expect me to believe this? I expect you to know, he said, pushing back his chair. The badge doesn't make the man. The orders do. He left without paying for his coffee. For days, that meeting gnawed at me. I'd come into office promising transparency, justice, change. But what if the rot went deeper than one man's prejudice? What if the very people shaking my hand were the ones who'd told him to humiliate me all those years ago? The thought made my stomach turn. I decided to test it. At the next council meeting, I brought up the idea of a full independent review of police misconduct cases over the last 15 years. I didn't name Hensley, but the air in the room shifted instantly. 2 council members shifted in their seats. One coughed into his fist like he was buying time. By the time the vote came, the review had been tabled indefinitely. That night, an envelope was slipped under my apartment door. No note this time, just photographs. Me, in the diner with Hensley. Me, leaning forward, listening. Me, in a frame that could be twisted into anything. The message was clear, they were watching. I couldn't let it drop. Not now. I started holding community nights, open forums where residents could share their experiences with the police. The stories poured out like water from a cracked dam. Mothers who'd seen their sons frisked for walking home from school. Shop owners harassed for blocking the sidewalk. Men who still carried court papers for charges that were nothing more than a cop's bad mood. Hensley's name came up again and again. But so did others. It was bigger than him. The breaking point came 2 months into my term. A young boy named Malik was stopped outside a movie theater. Witnesses said the officers pushed him against a wall, searched his pockets, and left him with a black eye. The reason? He fit the description of a shoplifter 3 blocks away. I called for a press conference the next morning. Cameras, microphones, the whole city watching. This is not the city we're going to be, I said, voice steady. This ends now. It was the first time I saw fear on some of those council members' faces. Not guilt. Fear. That night, I got another call from Hensley. You just signed your own death warrant, he said. No, I told him. I just signed yours. From there, it became a race. I was gathering evidence, allies, the kind of proof that couldn't be buried under paperwork. They were trying to undermine me, budget threats, anonymous tips to the press about financial irregularities in my campaign. But every smear, every leak, only made the people rally harder. The same streets where I'd once been forced to kneel were now filled with voices chanting my name. And still, Hensley kept calling. Some nights he'd taunt me. Other nights, he'd almost sound regretful, like he wanted to explain something he couldn't say out loud. Finally, I agreed to meet him again, but on my terms. We met in the old train yard, rusting freight cars lined up like sleeping beasts. He looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders slumped under a faded jacket. "You were right," he said before I could speak. "It wasn't just me. But you don't want to know how far it goes." "I already do," I told him. He looked at me for a long time, then pulled something from his pocket, a flash drive. "Everything's on here. Names, dates, orders. But once you open it, you can't go back." I took it, and for the first time since that night in the rain, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't cruelty. It was fear. I didn't plug the flash drive into my office computer. That would have been political suicide. Instead, I drove 3 miles out of town to an old repair shop run by a friend from high school, Jalen, a man who could strip down a hard drive faster than most people can tie their shoes. "What's on it?" he asked, slotting the drive into a battered laptop that looked like it had survived a war. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it's dangerous." Jalen shot me a look. "You always had a knack for understatement." It took less than a minute for the screen to fill with files. Hundreds of them. PDFs, scanned memos, audio recordings. The first document I opened was a police dispatch log from the year I'd been stopped by Hensley. But the entry wasn't about a suspicious bag. It was labeled Public Compliance Exercise. Beneath that, subject identified for public humiliation to deter local activism. And the signature at the bottom wasn't Hensley's. It belonged to Councilman Greger, the same man who'd shaken my hand after the election, smiling for the cameras like we were old friends. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. We opened more files. Dozens of public compliance orders targeting activists, church leaders, even a school principal who tried to organize a diversity program. The pattern was unmistakable: humiliate the leaders, scare the followers, keep the power structure intact. Audio recordings followed. In one, Hensley's voice was unmistakable. "You want him scared? Fine. But don't expect me to babysit if it blows back." Another voice, cold and deliberate, replied, "It won't. These people don't fight back." I shut the laptop. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The problem was, I couldn't just dump this to the press. Not yet. The council would circle the wagons, spin it as fake, maybe even destroy the originals. I needed leverage, something that would force them to stay on the defensive while the truth spread. But that meant keeping Hensley alive in more ways than one. If they thought he'd flipped, he wouldn't last the week. That night, I called him. "They'll come for you," I said. "They already have," he replied, his voice flat. "I've been getting followed since the day I gave you that drive." "Where are you?" "Doesn't matter. Just do what you have to do." The line went dead. 2 days later, he was on the news. Not for turning whistleblower, no. For being under investigation for an unrelated misconduct case. It was a textbook smear, meant to discredit him before anyone could take his testimony seriously. And it worked. Within hours, the online chatter turned vicious. Wasn't he the one who roughed up those kids in Eastbrook? Figures. They're all dirty cops. The council was burying him alive in public opinion before I could even breathe. I knew I had to move fast. I scheduled an emergency public safety announcement in the largest auditorium in the city, inviting not just the press, but every community group that had ever lodged a complaint against the police department. When I stepped on stage, the lights were blinding. I could see shadows shifting in the front row: reporters, city officials, a couple of familiar council faces pretending to be supportive. I didn't ease into it. Some of you know me as your mayor. But before that, I was just another black man in this city who was told to kneel in the rain because a police officer decided that's where I belonged. The room went still. "I've spent weeks listening to your stories. Tonight, I'm here to tell you it's not just about bad apples. It's about a system that has, for years, issued direct orders to publicly humiliate and intimidate community leaders. I have proof." I held up a thick folder, a decoy. The real files were encrypted on Jalen's off-grid server. The council members in the front row froze. A couple of them tried to mask it with polite smiles. "I will be releasing these documents to an independent investigative board," I continued, "and to every national news outlet willing to hold this city accountable." The crowd erupted cheers, applause, a few shouts of anger aimed at the officials in the room. But over the noise, I caught sight of a figure slipping out the side door. Councilman Gregor. That night, my phone lit up with unknown numbers. Threats, bribes, veiled warnings about what happens to people who dig too deep. By morning, the city felt different. Not safer, just awake. People were talking in grocery lines, at bus stops, in barber shops. Someone had cracked the lid, and the smell was spreading. But with the light came the shadow. My security detail reported a break-in at the community center where I used to work. Nothing stolen, just every file cabinet tipped over, papers scattered like a warning. And then came the call from Jalen. "They found me," he said. His voice was shaking. Two guys in suits said they were from the municipal compliance office. They knew about the drive. "Do you still have it?" "Yes, but if they come back." "Don't stay there." I cut in. "I'll send someone." The next 48 hours were a blur. I was running from meeting to meeting, giving interviews, carefully releasing enough of the documents to keep the public furious, but not enough to let the council destroy the rest. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I half expected to see Hensley. But he was gone. Completely. Until he wasn't. It was raining again, the hard, punishing kind that makes the city look like it's made of broken glass. I was crossing the street toward City Hall when I heard his voice behind me. "You're not moving fast enough." I turned. He was standing under an awning, soaked through, his eyes bloodshot. "They're already talking about removing you," he said. A vote of no confidence. "You think you've got the people, but they've got the power to cut you out before you can finish what you started." "Then help me finish it," I told him. He hesitated, then pulled a small black recorder from his jacket. "This was the last meeting I had before I quit. You'll want to hear it." He pressed it into my hand and vanished into the rain. That night, in my apartment, I played the recording. Static, then voices, Gregor's among them. "Make an example of him. Same way we did the others. He's too popular. The only way to kill that is to make him untouchable, toxic." Another voice, female, sharp as broken glass. "And what about Carter?" "Gregor, leave that to me. By the time we're done, he'll wish he'd just taken the knee." My stomach turned. This wasn't just about silencing me. This was about erasing me, turning me into a cautionary tale for anyone who thought they could rise too high. I sent the recording to 3 trusted allies in the press, timing the release for the next morning's headlines. By dawn, it was everywhere. The city didn't explode overnight, but it did shift. Protests doubled in size. Council meetings turned into battlegrounds. And for the first time, I saw cracks in their armor, Gregor avoiding cameras, a few officials suddenly on leave. But I also knew this was the point where things could turn dangerous. Desperation makes people reckless. And I had one last card to play. I called a full public assembly in the main square, the same square where I'd once been made to kneel. When I stepped up to the microphone, the rain had stopped. The crowd was enormous. In the front row, I saw faces from every neighborhood: kids, elders, business owners, teachers. "This city belongs to you," I began. "And for too long, it's been run by people who think fear is the same thing as respect. They've tried to humiliate you. They've tried to silence you. They even tried to silence me." I let the pause stretch, the weight of the moment hanging heavy. "But I'm still here. And so are you. And together, we're going to take back what's ours." The roar that followed wasn't just loud, it was alive. Somewhere in the crowd, I thought I saw Hensley. Just for a second. Watching. And maybe, just maybe, I saw him nod. The square felt like the beating heart of the city that night. The chants echoed against the glass of the surrounding buildings, their rhythm steady, defiant. Somewhere in that sea of faces, I could feel history shifting, not because of me alone, but because thousands of voices had decided they would no longer whisper. The council had no choice but to respond. 2 days later, they announced an emergency session to address public concerns regarding law enforcement procedures. Translation: they were cornered. I walked into that chamber like I owned it, not because I was the mayor, but because every seat behind me was filled with citizens who had shown up to see justice drag itself out of the shadows. Reporters lined the walls, pens poised, cameras humming. Councilman Gregor sat at the far end, his expression carved from stone. His tie was loose. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked tired. "This meeting will come to order," he said, voice flat. I didn't wait to be recognized. "Before we begin, I'm submitting formal evidence to the State Attorney General's office. Audio recordings, written orders, and internal memos documenting a systematic abuse of police powers sanctioned by members of this council. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Gregor's eyes narrowed. These are unverified accusations. They are verified. I cut in, pulling a thick binder from my briefcase. And they've already been copied to every major news outlet in the country. That did it. The silence was a living thing. One councilwoman stood abruptly. I move that we call for an independent investigation. Another followed. Then another. Gregor pounded the gavel. Out of order. But the momentum was gone. He could feel it. We all could. Over the next week, resignations rolled in like waves against the shore. Officials who'd once smirked at me in meetings were suddenly retiring to spend more time with their families. The police chief announced he'd be stepping down to ensure public trust. And then, one morning, the headline hit. State corruption probe targets city council members in police misconduct scandal. Gregor's face was plastered on every screen. The man who'd ordered my humiliation was now the one being paraded in handcuffs through the courthouse steps. It should have felt like victory. But it didn't. Not completely. Because Hensley was still out there. I found him 2 days later in a rundown motel on the edge of town. The door was unlocked. He was sitting on the bed, staring at the muted TV. "You did it," he said without looking at me. "We did it," I corrected. He gave a small, bitter laugh. "Don't give me credit. I didn't do it for the city. I did it because I knew if they turned on me, I'd be dead in a week." I leaned against the wall. "Why did you really give me that drive, Mark?" He didn't answer right away. His hands were clasped so tightly I could see his knuckles whiten. Because that night, the one in the rain, his voice trailed off. I saw my father. He was a mean drunk. Used to make me kneel in the mud when I talked back. Said it was to teach me respect. He shook his head, eyes wet. And I passed it on. Didn't even think about it until I saw your face that night. And then I buried it. Until I couldn't anymore. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the closest he could come. "You still have to answer for what you did," I said. "I know." When the grand jury convened, Hensley testified. Not everything. He kept some names buried, maybe out of fear, maybe out of some twisted loyalty. But what he did share helped seal the case. The council's old network collapsed under the weight of subpoenas and plea deals. The police department was gutted, rebuilt under a civilian oversight board. New training, new accountability measures, new faces in uniforms. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was a start. The first anniversary of my inauguration came on a clear spring morning. The square was full again, but this time it wasn't for protest, it was for celebration. Families brought kids, food trucks lined the streets, and music spilled from every corner. I stood on the same steps where I'd once shaken Gregor's hand, looking out over a city that was beginning to believe in itself again. When the speeches were over and the crowd began to mingle, I spotted him. Hensley. No uniform, no badge. Just a man in a worn jacket, standing at the edge like he didn't quite belong. We locked eyes. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he gave a single nod, not of friendship, not of forgiveness, but of recognition. And I nodded back. Later that night, as the last of the cleanup crews packed up, I walked alone through the square. The echoes of laughter and music still hung in the air. I stopped at the spot where I'd once knelt in the rain. The pavement was dry now, the streetlight above casting a warm circle of light. I thought about the boy I'd been that night, cold, humiliated, certain that nothing would ever change. And I thought about the man standing here now. The world doesn't hand you justice. You have to build it, piece by piece, knowing it will never be flawless. But if you keep building, keep fighting, maybe you can leave something behind that's worth the struggle. I turned away from the spot and walked on, the sound of the city alive around me. For the first time in a long time, it felt like it belonged to all of us. Months later, a letter arrived at my office. No return address, no signature, just a single line on plain paper. "Don't stop now." I knew the handwriting, and I didn't plan to. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.